Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful day. It is so great to be here. I love being up here at Yesler Terrace because this is such a great symbol of who we are as a city. This wonderful, beautiful place in our city, a place where our former governor and Secretary of Commerce spent much of his youth in Yesler Terrace, where we built housing for people, where we have the great park and recreation center where market and middle class and low income live and work together and care about their community. And that's why we're here today, again, is to say that we will stand up for Seattle's values. We will make sure that fair wages and protecting workers is at the center of our policies. We know that we are living in a time that is one of the most disruptive economic times in our country's history. It is probably one of the most disruptive times since the Industrial Revolution. Our economy is changing so rapidly, and with it, those long-term jobs that have consistent wages and benefits are disappearing with them, and the gig economy is on the rise. In this rapidly changing economy, we need to make sure that we work for economic justice, that we make sure that our workers have those hard-fought protections that we've fought for generations. There is no doubt that the explosive growth of companies like Lyft and Uber has helped enrich many and has helped create opportunity for communities throughout our region. But there are some facts that are absolutely clear as well. Many Uber and Lyft drivers are not receiving fair compensation, especially after they have to pay the expenses associated with doing the work. And second, the explosive growth of Uber and Lyft has had a significant impact on Seattle congestion. Over the past decade, we have been the fastest growing city in the country, and the growth has brought it with it incredible innovations and jobs. But it's also brought some significant challenges. Average rents in Seattle have increased by 44%. 44%. The median home sale price in Seattle in 6 years has increased 86%. But workers' wages have barely budged. More and more workers, like our nurses, our construction workers, our teachers, can't afford to live in Seattle. And it's no secret that our traffic congestion is some of the worst in the country. We know that Uber and Lyft brings with it many benefits and values. People rely on that to get that last mile. Many people don't own a car, so they can use Uber and Lyft. But it also contributes to the congestion in the city of Seattle. It slows our buses and creates congestion not just in our streets, but at our valuable curb space. Last year alone, Uber and Lyft rides, starting or ending in the city of Seattle, 24 million. 24 million rides. We know the impacts of that volume of traffic on the city of Seattle. We found that one study the University of Washington did recently said that during the peak times, Uber and Lyft vehicles picking up and dropping off in South Lake Union accounted for 1/3 of the traffic volume. Anyone who's tried to get through Mercer knows what that means. Of course, we also know that Uber and Lyft drivers are an important part of our communities and our economy. But despite their hard work and their contributions, many of them are not making a living wage. That's because most gig workers, like these drivers, aren't subject to our city's requirement that large employers pay a $16 minimum wage. On top of that, we don't get standard benefits that many workers have, like workers' compensation, sick leave, unemployment insurance, even the payroll tax portion. That's not good enough for Seattle. When we have this many workers working hard to make our city a better place, who are using driving to support their families and their hopes and dreams for the next generation, they need to be treated fairly. From our $15 fight for minimum wage to our domestic worker Bill of Rights, we have always been that city that understands the success of our city and the success of any company relies on treating workers fairly. That's why today we are announcing our Fair Share plan to invest in workers, transit, and affordable housing. And can I just say that streetcar ding was right on cue. This proposal is ensuring that Seattle continues to build on its legacy of fighting for workers and economic justice. And it's in a growing city to make sure that the people who actually work in Seattle can afford to live in Seattle. We have to make sure that this great economy works for more people. Right now, Uber and Lyft only pay their drivers for a portion of the time they're in their cars working. If you think about it, there's about 3 periods. There's when they've got the driver in the car, when they've accepted the ride or going to get the driver, and when they're waiting for the driver. Only a fraction of that time, the time when the people are actually in the car, is being compensated. That means they're not paying for all the other times that they are actually working for and benefiting those billion-dollar corporations. And on top of that, they don't provide critical benefits like sick and safe time, meal or rest breaks, unemployment insurance, or any time off if there's a family crisis. My Fair Share plan will mandate that drivers be paid a minimum wage and have access to critical benefits and expenses. Under our Fair Share plan, drivers will be paid for their time with a passenger and time spent driving to pick up the passenger and expenses. We will work to make sure they have access to critical benefits that other workers have. Right now, Uber and Lyft have declined to share their data with us. That's one reason why we're commissioning a study to determine what the exact right amount is for both wages and reasonable expenses. We've been working with the companies. I'm optimistic they will bring their information to the table. I'm very optimistic that their public stand on this has been, at least on part of it, that they support a real minimum wage and reasonable expenses. In order to implement this landmark worker protection, we will need the data from the companies and from drivers. Having the driver voice in this is critical. I have been having the great fortune over the last several weeks to meet with drivers in different ways and to have a roundtable and hear their stories. I know what we're doing is the right thing to do. In addition to this, we will make sure that as we grow as a city, we will put an additional 50-cent tax on Uber and Lyft rides. Our studies and our data shows that will have no impact on the number of rides people take or on the money that goes in the pocket of drivers. But what it will allow us to do is make sure we have better transportation infrastructure for that city of the future and make sure that we have housing right in our city so people can walk to work, ride to work, roll to work. A growing city needs to make sure that people can actually afford to live in that city. One day, there'll be Uber and Lyft drivers who can say that they stand with workers because they have been treated fairly. We know also that we have to have a better way, because this is people's lifeblood, that if the companies have the sole right to kick people off the platform and deny them their source of wages, that has to be fair. So we will also be creating a dispute resolution center that gives those drivers a way to have representation and an independent forum to challenge the deactivation of drivers. In the end, we'll be able to invest with a 51-cent tax. We will have 52 million for 500 users of housing near transit. For 51 cents, we'll also be able to make sure that Uber and Lyft drivers can get paid a fair wage. And our Fair Share plan will also create $56 million to fully fund the streetcar and make sure that we are a world-class city that deserves a world-class transportation system. We need to think big. We need to make those investments like this, not just for today and for these workers, but for their families and for their children and for the future of our city. We need it for our climate goals. Our Fair Share plan will make sure that this modest 51-cent tax is one that will, in the end, enrich not just the drivers and their families, but all of Seattle. I want to be clear. This is not a tax on riders. It is a tax on $2 billion corporations that are public corporations using public laws to meet what they need to do as companies. When they went public, they were taking the benefits and resources of the taxpayers and American residents. Uber, when it went public, was valued at over $82 billion. Lyft was valued at over $28 billion. They can afford a 50-cent tax, which data shows will not decrease the number of rides, nor hurt what goes in the pocket of drivers, but will help our city and be able to deal with the impacts on our city. I want to recognize all the people standing behind me for all the work that they have done on this, for them standing up for fairness and justice. I really want